So welcome to class number 10, this Tuesday, February 8th. So with Black History Month, we talked a little bit about the Joe Rogan situation in Spotify. We didn't record it. I just forgot. We didn't say anything too controversial. So I'll recap that conversation, recap some of the questions that people asked. But in order not to bore everybody here, we're not going to repeat all that. We're going to switch gears and just dive right into corporate development, which is the theme of the day. So does anybody know the difference between business development and corporate development? Anybody want to take a guess? Well, yeah, that's a great point. It's really the simple words would be organic versus inorganic. So business development is anything where you do partnerships, marketing, commercial deals that you lead still with other companies in some kind of partnership, but arm's length. Like there's no, legal gets involved to effectively review contracts, make sure terms are fair, make sure there's no misunderstanding. The key is meeting of the minds, that the two sides are on the same page. But there's no like legal construct where company A and company B set up a joint venture or company A invests in company B, nothing of that nature. Corporate development is effectively, all about kind of merger, acquisition, investment, divestment, etc. Now, you've seen this man before. One of my flashbacks to the late 90s, I was sitting in Professor Soufani's class at the college down the street in the management of financial institution. He was a former trader, and he once said, "Gobble or be gobbled." And that stuck with me. And you know what's funny about business is there is always a regression to the mean. There are periods where companies, all they do is they merge, they hook up, they get together, they get bigger, they cut costs, they lay off people, they go, okay, like you got Ivory, it's like you got Crest, we got Colgate, do we keep both, do we shed one? That's all like people, like the trends seem to go towards. But then at other times, it's the exact opposite. They're like, we got to divest. We're going to spin out this business. We bought this, we grew it, or we invested internally, we grew this unit. It makes no sense. So it is totally okay for you guys to sometimes get whiplash, to be like, what's happening? Why is everybody hooking up? And then at other times saying, why is everybody divorcing? It is based on trends, the same way that sometimes you have a bear market or a bull market. Sometimes it's like a seller's market. Sometimes it's a buyer's market. Different trends will lead to different kind of backdrops. But the idea of corporate development is it's whether you like capitalism or you hate it. It's like me saying, I like the rain or I don't like the rain. It rains, right? It is about growth. For better or worse, the system of capitalism is you got to feed the beast. You got to grow. And the reason for that is competition. You are big. People want to take you down. Somebody hungrier. There's somebody younger. It's basically what I like about capitalism is it avoids complacency. It avoids cockiness. If you get cocky with your clients, the other guy's going to nail you. That is what's beautiful about capitalism. There's a ton of stuff that's crap about capitalism. You know what I mean? Like there's no doubt about it. But the great thing about capitalism is competition, humility, which sounds weird to think of capitalism, these big bankers. That's a cliche. Capitalism is actually about the little guy. The little guy could become big by taking down the big, arrogant, machine. That's actually what drew me to capitalism. I remember when I was at Marinopolis, in one of my humanities class, our teacher was like, let's read Communist Manifesto. And I was like, commie, what is he doing? Why is he teaching this? Then when I would read it, like when you're young, you're like, hey, there's some good ideas in here. Then you study history and you're like, okay, not so fast. So capitalism really boils down to, if you don't grow in a healthy, sustainable way, you expose yourself for others to come and pull the rug from underneath you. So it's very naive. I've always said I'm very idealistic, utopian and whatnot, but it actually is all about fairness, humility, but yeah, it comes with a bunch of bad because people don't manage their greed well. But ultimately, it's the fear of getting fat, lazy, complacent. And for that, you got to grow. You got to grow because if you don't grow, you stagnate, you actually become small. It's a bit of a contrarian view, but it's the only way I get to sleep at night, I guess. So pillar 9 of this class is the exit strategy. And that basically, it entails corporate development, entails mergers, acquisitions, ultimately an IPO, which stands for an initial public offering. You've seen this before. So everything I've done in my career has had a tangent, a pillar, a theme of being obsessed, super fanboy of mergers and acquisitions. When I studied business, I wanted to be an investment banker. When I wrote all those articles, it was always about deal making. When I wrote my books, it was always talking about partnerships that worked and failed. I've been very lucky to work at 3 companies. All have had a lot of M&A with them. When I speak about motivation, it's always about ultimately prevailing, the validation that you get from others. And so one of the articles I wrote years ago for TechCrunch was, if financing is marriage, where you basically, if you raise money from investors, I got news for you. You're basically marrying these people. You're going to be with them for 2-3 years, 5 years, 10 years. This is why VCs themselves say, we got a time horizon in 5 years, we like our money. Because they don't want to be married to you forever. They don't actually like you that much. They may not even like you at all. They may like the business you're in, but eventually they want their money out. And M&A, I hate to break it to you, once you sell your business, it's kind of a new chapter, but it is also kind of symbolically somewhat akin to death. A bit weird to say, a bit cryptic, but we'll discuss why that is. So don't forget, when I was actually in your shoes as a student, all I wanted to do was investment banking. I wanted to do M&A. It was the late 90s. The EU was basically forming. I was like, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I was like, I'm going to go to Europe and do M&A as the market opens up. Clearly, life had different plans. At Mama, my first experience in like the startup world, before I joined, Mama raised 10 million in the then largest private placement for a startup. It was getting offers from San Francisco Bay Area companies valuing it at like 150 to 200 million, but we never sold. One time I remember Overture, I alluded to Overture, GoTo, the company whose business model Google stole. They came. I think it was a fishing expedition to sniff out some of our mojo, for lack of a better word. Later on, when the company went public, I had nothing to do. I left. I was a witness more than anything else there. Mark Cuban bought some shares. And I think one day they announced their earnings and they were profitable, and Google wasn't public yet. So investors didn't have a way to play the search engine industry, which was growing really quickly. And the stock went like from $1 to like $8 because there wasn't enough shares. So people kept buying that day. And it was kind of like euphoria. And, it's kind of an interesting day when you're like, wow, like years ago I was at this company and today it's on the Wall Street Journal. Anyway, so what happened to Mama in the end? Mama was a web search, meta search. There was a company that did database search called Copernic in Quebec City. They merged. And then, the reality is every company in search got Google. Google just became a monopoly with like, oops, if they hear me say monopoly, the floor will open and I will disappear. But they basically became a monopoly, and every other company in search starved or drowned, the way you want to look at it. And then when I went to Aspen, I did a lot of stuff, writing, did a lot of business development deals. I did a lot of sales, did a lot of interviews. And then ultimately, one day I got a call from a business development, corporate development exec from San Francisco. And he's like, I work with IGN Entertainment. We are strong in gaming. We bought Rotten Tomatoes. They're strong in movies. You guys are don't laugh, you guys are the metrosexuals in Montreal. We need a lifestyle brand. We want to buy Ask Men. And I remember looking at myself going, I don't know if you know what you're talking about, but yeah, sure. If you're a gamer geek in San Fran, maybe you could put us in that bucket. And so they bought us for $13.5 million, which wasn't a huge sum, but it was not a bad outcome for a Montreal-based company. And then 3, 4, 5 months later, IGN itself, which wanted to do an initial public offering, got acquired by Fox for $650 million. And that's why a few months later, when I left, effectively Rupert Murdoch's News Corp sued me, and I prevailed in court when I was accused of violating my non-competition, which I was not. And then last but not least, where I would say I've gotten the bulk of my experience in M&A is actually, ironically, at WatchMojo, which really was a lot of missed connections. Like it was a lot of VCs that turned me down. I wasn't too sold on a few offers I got from a handful of VCs that wanted to invest. My God, if I give you a list of every company we had mergers and acquisition discussions, it's like 50, 70 names and the who's who. Um, in 2013, it was Belo, it was a Texas-based media company. They wanted to buy us. We had conversations with Time, like Time Magazine, Fortune, Sports Illustrated. They really wanted to buy us. They wanted us to kind of videofy all their assets, take like those magazines and give them like a video, which is where the world was going. Meredith, which ended up buying Time. I mean, really a lot of companies. And there was never, I'll talk about the different phases. We never really did anything until one day I did do a deal, which we'll discuss. You have to keep watching the movie to find out what the details were. But ultimately, M&A is, you find yourself in a fork in the road, and M&A is a means to an end, and the end is to grow. We discussed why it's important to grow, otherwise you stagnate and you die. And the same way that we've said, like, what drives people, there's always a parallel between people and organizations, right? Because organizations are run by people. What drives M&A? It's the same things. You want either more money, more revenue. You want more respect for your technology. If you are Microsoft and people view you as an aging, not anymore, as like an aging software operating system company, maybe you go out there and you buy something because you feel like, hey, it's going to give us the respect of engineers. And oftentimes I said people are driven by virtues and sins. Yeah, there's also a lot of fear. If you feel like you're going to become redundant, you're going to want to go and buy your way. So deal making is like a way to create value. It's basically, it's time is money. So you could build something from internal, like operations and your team, but you also go, yeah, I'm not sure if my team can pull this off, or they're going to take a ton of time. And you guys, when you're building small stuff, yeah, admittedly, you're going to be the target. But if you do your job really well, you may become the hunter looking at younger stuff. But it's basically a way to get to market faster. And that manifests itself in many ways. It's rare, but sometimes it's content marrying distribution. Of late, it's a lot of distribution buying content. The biggest companies in the world are platforms. They got distribution. They need something to fill those pipes. And instead of giving half the revenue to the content owners, they sometimes say, well, you know what, we're going to perhaps just buy the underlying asset. So we leverage our balance sheet to buy something, but our income statement, we protect it by not paying half of it out as a cost. So it's kind of like, it's the kind of sales financial engineering. Sometimes it allows you to move in one area to another, right? If you are, let's say, commerce, Amazon, sure, today you are global, but at one point you said, you know what, maybe we go by Zappos, because Zappos is really strong in shoes. And yeah, I don't really think I want to be dealing with customer service of stinky shoes. But Zappos does it really well. We're just going to buy them. If you're eBay, think about it, you're kind of in community. You had people shopping, auctions, and buying crap that's like, I don't need this sound system. You sell it. But then you're like, you know what? We need to have better trust and payment. So let's go out and buy PayPal. So it's like allows you to go vertical, or it could allow you to go horizontal. Yeah, okay. Even though it's user generated content, early on it was a land grab market share for engagement. So if you are a fan of G.I. Joe figurines, you have users who are taking pictures of their G.I. Joe, uploading. It was still user generated. That's content. It may not be content versus an article on the history of Transformers, but all those listings of here's Cobra Commander, here's this Transformer, here's this He-Man, here's this race car, that's still content. Just it's user generated content around commercial products. Amazon is one of the biggest publishers of content, the reviews. When I was looking to get a stationary bike as part of my physio after my injury, I read like a bunch of reviews on these bikes, and I was like, that's going to be what I'm going to decide it on. So it's content, but that's why I say context is king. Content is very different depending on the person. If you're not interested in a stationary bike, you're like, this is boring. But that moment you need to buy a stationary bike, you would almost pay $5 to read the top 5 reviews because you're going to go spend $1,000 on something. You know what I mean? So it's relative. So, we talked about how way back, Yahoo refused to buy Google, and the world could have been very different. Nobody's going to say that Google would have gone on to become what it became, but sometimes, and then Google obviously won because Yahoo decided to choose Google as its default search engine, which was really a boneheaded move. But sometimes it's true that like the best deals are the ones you don't make. But then again, other times the worst deals are literally the worst deals you do make. So this is a video that we produced, top 10 disastrous mergers and acquisitions. It's funny because this is a video that a lot of business classes and business teachers would show in their class. And then I would always see on Twitter, oh my God, I watch Mojo all the time for their, Batman videos and their music videos. My teacher is showing me this, worlds colliding. Anyway, you're welcome to watch it. Oh no, I didn't want to play it. I will just say that the list is, we don't need to go through it. This is a video that I probably researched this like 10 years ago, but we put together. I'm just going to highlight a couple. So Kmart and Sears, again, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but there's like a saying whenever deals are announced that sometimes if you tie 2 bricks together, they're not going to float. So if you think of where retail was in 2005, it was the beginning of, e-tailing taking off. Kmart and Sears was like 2 sinking ships, and they're like, you know what, let's see if we can cut costs or whatever. Yeah, that's not really smart. In hindsight, imagine if like Amazon would have bought Sears. Sears would probably be more powerful right now because it would be the fulfillment. And Amazon, the way it bought Zappos, could have Sears as like its store experience. Amazon is spending billions to move into brick and mortar. CBS and Viacom, I put it here. It's weird because like they merged and then a few years later they divorced and then merged again. It's actually a smart sense for them to be together, but I put it there because it didn't make sense that then they split up a few years later. Daimler and Chrysler, I included because the culture was off. Here you had a German company producing Mercedes-Benz, viewed itself as like the bespoke, ultimate high-end car maker. Chrysler makes fine cars, but a very different culture in Detroit. They invited me years ago to go with them to the LA car shows they were releasing, because I was also a columnist and not just an executive. And I remember hanging out with them and asking them about the deal, and they were like, it was like aliens. It was just very different people, very different culture. But from a manufacturing perspective, in the terms of supply chain and parts, it made sense. Hey, you guys make cars, we make cars, we get more market share. But not really culturally a logical fit. Seagram and Vivendi, so the Bronfman family, one of Montreal's biggest entrepreneurial stories with Sam Bronfman like 100+ years ago. He obviously, there's a saying we're going to talk about in the next class, legal, that Honoré de Balzac wrote, behind every great fortune is a great crime. And I don't necessarily mean literally a crime, even sometimes alleged. The Bronfmans benefited from, obviously, bootlegging. The fact that alcohol sales were not legal in America was like a huge opportunity. And to Sam Bronfman's credit, he recognized that, and he basically built up Seagram at a time when he recognized that opportunity. And, Bronfman built an empire around liquor sales. But if you are his second generation, there's a saying, from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. The second generation is like, hey, we're going to inherit this and make it bigger. The third generation is like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do this. So Edgar Bronfman was like, no, I believe in entertainment. Now, people always made fun of Edgar Bronfman Jr., but to his credit, he foresaw the rise of entertainment, the rise of streaming. The fact that today entertainment is so precious and everybody wants to own it, he was just a bit early, which you've heard the saying, being early is sometimes the same thing as being wrong. That was a tremendous destruction of wealth. Seagram and Vivendi in that $34 billion deal, the Bronfman family's value worth went from like 10 billion to 3 or 4 billion. Ouch. Still, they had 3-4 billion at the end of it, but clearly not a lot of happy shareholders there. And the worst one, historically, people always think of AOL and Time Warner. This was like at the peak of the dot-com bubble. The bubble had burst. AOL was like this internet service provider, ISP, low tech, Time Warner with Warner Cable, what had broadband. It was weird because AOL had the reach and the audience and Time Warner had the content. So made a ton of sense, but it failed because of two things ultimately, culture and structure. Had Time Warner, it was like a merger, but because at the time AOL's market value was bigger, it was as if AOL had bought Time Warner. But if you're like an executive at Time Warner with those assets and a bunch of yahoos from Virginia, and that's not a knock at Virginia, but I'm just saying if you're a New York executive and Virginia-based AOL shows up saying, we bought your company, yeah, you're not going to greet them with open arms. You're going to go out of your way to make sure that that deal does not succeed. So the cultures did not mesh, the structure did not mesh, make sense, and the deal fell apart. Now, there are some deals that make a ton of sense. This is an article I wrote in 2011 on media M&A. We're not going to go through them all. Look, in 1998, when Microsoft bought Hotmail, it gave Microsoft a good, quick entry into the web. Hotmail was one of the first things that as a product would go viral. When AOL Time Warner in 2004 bought advertising.com, that was almost signified like the return of the internet. From 2000, after the market crash, to the mid 2000s, the internet was supposedly dead. Moving on, Amazon buying Zappos was like a very good deal. You know, $1 billion seemed like a ton back then, but it did strengthen. It was actually a good deal for both, to be candid with you. Now, it's ironic. CBS buying CNET in 2008 was at the time a good deal. This, in the end, CNET sold it for, I think, like a couple $100 million to Red Ventures. So in hindsight, crappy deal, but at the time, CBS had no online reach whatsoever. So, and at the time, CNET was bigger, but if I had to do this list again, I probably would not include that. DoubleClick selling to Google for $3 billion was a brilliant deal for both parties. DoubleClick would have become like also ran like old internet 1.0 ad serving business. But by selling to Google, Google got really good technology relative to what it had and really good data. And it was before like the antitrust folks understood what the hell was going on. So if Google became an even more dominant force, it started off with that. Google then buying Applied Semantics is really a lot of the strength Google had before going into the ad business before their IPO was a result of that deal. It only cost them $100 million. eBay, number 4, buying PayPal. Oh, by the way, 4 is interesting. Overture GoTo, we've discussed this deal a lot. Here you should apply to you in terms of the power of distribution. Overture had no distribution of its own. A lot of its distribution came from Yahoo. So Yahoo went to it and said, sell to us, if not, we're going to cut you off. So Overture thought it was worth like $5 billion, let's say, but it didn't have any leverage in the discussion. Yahoo was like, we're not going to renew our distribution deal. Your value will go to 0. And Overture was like, but okay, so we want $5 billion. They're like, no, because if we cut our deal, your value goes to 0 and we can buy you for $1 tomorrow. So $1 billion is great, but it just goes to show if you build distribution on a platform, they could come back and do something like that. It's different like the App Store. The App Store is not going to come and single out one app and say, you sell to us or you're dead. But in a relationship that is more bilateral, where company A and company B seem to have a symbiotic win-win relationship, be very careful if it's really win-win or if one side has tremendous leverage over you. eBay buying PayPal was a great deal for eBay. PayPal went on to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Obviously, last week its stock got decimated, but that's like 20 years later. Google buying Android for $50 million, one could argue would be the greatest deal ever in media and tech because it's Android. It's basically like what is the #1 operating system in all of the world. I put it number 2 because I felt if Google would have not bought Android, it could have bought something else and more or less done the same thing. Google buying YouTube for $1.65 billion is arguably the greatest M&A deal of all time. When we talked about Google's perfect storm, a lot of its success, you may recall, in red, touches on their M&A strategy, right? So M&A is tremendously important, not just for inorganic growth, but even for your organic business. When YouTube bought when Google bought YouTube, it was also both offensive and defensive. It was offensive because it gave Google the #1 video platform. But why was it also defensive? Anybody care to guess? Google is in search. It's the #1 search engine in the world. But at the time, YouTube was the #2 search engine in the world. It just so happened they were in the video space. So YouTube could have become a threat as the world shifted to searching for video content. And that is why when negotiations started, Google was like, yeah, we'll buy them for 10 million. 10 million. But as the talks continued during due diligence, Google was like, wait a minute. They're growing super fast. Their search volume is growing super fast. If the world keeps going to video and YouTube has all the videos in the world, they could become a threat to our core business. So they ended up buying it for $1.65 billion. That just goes to show how value is relative and changes. And so when we talked about YouTube success, a lot of YouTube success highlighted in red here came down to selling to Google. I don't think anybody, including the 3 founders at YouTube, say we should not have sold to Google. Despite the fact that they sold for $1.65 billion, and today YouTube is worth $750 billion, because were it not for Google's technology, were it not for the sales force that Google had, were it not for their legal prowess, and the patience that Google would allow YouTube to have to monetize, there's no way that YouTube would be where it is today. So the best deals really are like that. And YouTube went on to generate, this was a couple of years ago, in 2018, YouTube generated $15 billion, which was more than the sum of all the traditional TV companies. And this year, in 2021, they generated $29 billion. They doubled revenue off that massive base in 2 years. 3 years. Kind of insane. Question. Yeah, we're going to get to Instagram. You said, wait, which one when Amazon bought? Twitch, yes. So absolutely. Let's talk about that one. Amazon buying Twitch is a great example of a great deal before everybody really woke up to video streaming and all. But if you think of the rise of Discord, those who are more experts in gaming and all that would say that it's because Amazon did not maximize the Twitch opportunity, creating a vacuum for Discord. Again, the experts could disagree with me or agree, but I'm just saying that even successful deals sometimes curtail your growth because then you become a small thing in this massive thing. But you're right, that's a great deal. And Instagram, I did not include it in that list because it did not happen in 2011. Today, Instagram, Facebook would probably be #1 or #2. I mean, there are some people that say it's a better deal than YouTube. I still think YouTube is the greatest deal. Instagram, for sure, is bigger than Facebook now. So that's also a great deal. If you're interested in this stuff, John Malone, who I alluded to before, founded TCI Cable Cowboy. He eventually sold his business to AT&T, took all that money and went out and started Liberty Media, which today owns SiriusXM, Formula One, the Atlanta Braves baseball team. He's legendary. He's like the god of deal making. He's like kind of the power broker behind Warner Media and Discovery coming together as we speak. So if you're interested and you care about the entertainment industry, Cable Cowboy is actually not a book I pretended to read end to end. Cable Cowboy is probably one of the few books I read end to end, which there's very few of those. This book I read end to end. It's a brick, but I love M&A. This is on Lazare et Frères, Lazare Frères and Company, which is, I always, it's an investment bank, legendary investment bank. So, it's like, when you look at like the discrimination the Jewish people have faced over the course of their history, and when you think of like how success is adapting to setbacks and challenges, it's really interesting how the family navigated all of those challenges in Europe, ended up in America, the two sides of the family. Like it's almost like a soap opera biographies. It's a fascinating book. It's not only about M&A, but so fascinating. Like, oh my God, I read this a couple of years ago when we were on vacation. But anyway, you could tell but I'm a geek for this stuff. So this is also a really, really great book for those that like M&A, just as an FYI. Now, this is all great, but you're like, Ash, we're not AT&T, we're not Warner Media. What are you talking about? So yeah, I think for you guys, most of the corporate development that you're going to face with, if you're lucky, is the acqui-hire kind of type of deal. Many people do it. Apple does it all the time. We're going to explain. Cisco does it all the time. So what is acqui-hire? Acqui-hiring, it's a portmanteau for acquisition and hiring, also called a talent acquisition, describes the acquiring of a company primarily to recruit its employees rather than to gain control of its products and services. And so this was a term that only was coined in 2005, apparently. But I think today in particular, working from home, inflation, the workforce revolution, where young people are saying, yeah, no, we're not going to put up with a lot of the corporate BS that our parents put up, where older employees are like, you know what, I don't need to be rushed back to work to get COVID. I'm just going to retire or work part-time. There is a shortage of talent. It is really hard to start new products working from home. Working from home is not going to go away. The hybrid model will probably stick around. So that makes starting anything, launching anything really, really hard. So a lot of companies that are sitting on gargantuan sums of money, they're always going to say, do we build or do we buy? Slide, build or buy, which is really how big companies think of this. So Apple, absolutely. Sometimes they're like, you know what? It would take us 3 years, $1 billion, more importantly, an engineering team of 12 to 15 people for us to build something that will be 80% or maybe twice as good, maybe, as what these guys are doing. Okay, how much do they want? Let's go to Crunchbase. They've raised $30 million. I'm assuming their paper valuation is probably 80, 100. It'll probably be $200 million. Okay. So if we do this, it's 5 years. They're going to be further ahead. No guarantee we have it. 200 million? We're sitting on $200 billion of cash. They have so much money because they are cheap about it. It's the chicken or egg. Actually, the example I used was more appropriate for a Cisco that will buy things for 200 million. You're right. Apple's a lot stingier. I don't think I should disclose the amount, but a gentleman that I'm on an investment, a gentleman who started his VR company, an entrepreneur, and sold it to Apple. He went there to work for a few years. He came back. He's now a general partner. And long story short, he is he had that experience. It wasn't a $200 million acquisition, but they came early. It was like a VR headset he was building. But yeah, for them, it's time to market. But it's the same thing. There was a rumor that Amazon may buy Peloton. Amazon is extremely prudent and stingy when they buy stuff, So yeah, the reason why some companies have billions and billions of cash is because they don't throw it away. Like they don't want to end up on the worst list of M&A, basically. And so what is the structure for an acqui-hire? Because if you do your job well with these projects, you may actually be faced with this opportunity in technology where engineers are expensive, programmers are expensive. Sometimes it could be $1 million, even maybe $2 million, since this article was written 9 years ago. I'm sure it's higher now. Sometimes it could be a couple $1 million per engineer. So if you're a young startup, like Instagram, there were 13 employees. Facebook offered them $1 billion. Pre-revenue. Who here would turn down Facebook $1 billion offer, 0 revenue, 15 employees? Even if you know that today Instagram is worth $100 billion, who here would turn that down? Nobody would turn that down. Nobody thinks you would turn it down. Okay. So she was like, if I knew that it would be worth $100 billion, the caveat, the little asterisk is Facebook helped you become $1 billion. It's like YouTube. YouTube could have gone to 0. YouTube, when it got served by Viacom, $1 billion in damages lawsuit, without Google, would have capitulated. They could not have put up with that sustained onslaught, legal, this and that. It's expensive, it's a distraction. I know based on public statements that like the YouTube guys are like, no, we did the right thing because they know without Google. The Instagram guys are a bit more ambivalent. They eventually disagreed with Facebook on privacy, all that jazz. I don't think they would do things differently because they're like, we had no revenue or 13 employees. But knowing all that, would you still turn that down? It's hard. It's $1 billion. Like the binary outcome could have been zero. There could have been a new app, TikTok, something else, So, okay, when I started WatchMojo in 2006, I ended up spending, as I've repeated this a few times, I went into debt $500,000 after the $200,000 of cash, stocks, RRSPs. After all that, poof, gone. I then went into debt another $500,000. So when companies wanted to invest or not buy, because buy would have been, I would have paid off the debt. When investors wanted to buy, I would say, okay, but if you come on, you could also fire me. So if you want to invest $3 million, can I take 500,000? Not like 2 million, but can I take $500,000 to repay my debts? Because I said, if I take your money, then I can't do whatever I want. But if it takes 10 years for an exit, I don't want to have $500,000 of debt, which is a sizable amount for a long period of time. And at the time, secondaries were like taboo. They're like, no. Secondary is when money doesn't stay in the company. It goes to the shareholders in a fundraising. And that was at the time not accepted. Today, it's widely accepted. So yes, your idea that, hey, instead of selling to Facebook, why not go out and raise $100 million where you say we're going to take $50 million and put it in the company for growth, and we're going to cash out $50 million, let's say. That's more than enough money to do what you want, even in an expensive place like San Francisco. But where I think that makes sense personally, as a company, you have no revenue. Somebody offering you $1 billion is mighty enticing to offer. I don't think Instagram's math was the burn rate. I think Instagram was like, okay, what if, like, remember what they did to Snap, where they're like, they just copied the Snap product and launched stories. So I think if you're Instagram, as much as you're confident, there's still that voice in the back of your mind that goes, okay, if Facebook just says we're going to take out Instagram back then, and then people stop using us because there's like this equally good app by Facebook, Instacrap or whatever, it's could be really dangerous. That's the, when we sold to when Aspen sold to IGN, that's what Mark Young, the CEO of IGN, told us in a very friendly way. He was like, you guys should sell to us and join our growing company and our ambitions. If not, we're going to take the money we would have given you and just go compete with you. And it's not even that friendly. It's a threat. It's like, hey, if you don't sell to us, we're going to bury you. Now, most of the time, easier said than done. But if you're an entrepreneur, Instagram, no revenue, you are, hopefully you guys are going to be faced with that. Who here would sell their business if a competitor said, sell to us or we're going to compete with you? Who here would sell the business? Who here says, screw it? Who says, yes, you take the money, you sell? You can't say it depends, even though that's the number one answer. Who here would accept that deal and sell to a competitor, usually larger, if they got that kind of a threat? Like, we're going to compete with you and we're going to pour every resource we have to killing you. Who sells? Show of hands. Who says, screw this guy or gal, we're going to compete? I thought you'd be on that camp. Who else? You too? Oh, okay, very nice, very nice. Feisty. Okay, I mean, there's no right answer. You got to step in the arena. And it's funny because when I got sued by News Corp, a lot of lawyers were like, do you think they're doing this because they want to intimidate you into selling to them? I'm like, no, I think they just want to make an example, but maybe they wanted something else. Anyway, it's high stakes. So, companies do this all the time. My point is, you should be on the lookout. And when you meet investors, there's two kinds of investors. There are those who are like, what's your exit strategy? And for those, you should have your answer. But if an investor doesn't ask you what's your exit strategy, don't go like, oh, and our exit strategy is this and that. It's because they either don't care or they kind of would laugh at you because they're like, yeah, there's no way you could tell what your exit strategy is. So some golden rules of M&A. get it in your head right away that there's a difference between what you think is your value and what is the price of your business, the cost of your business. The value, you could say our asking price is something, but you probably have a different walkaway price. For the longest time, I remember this is like eons ago, I used to say our asking price is $10 million. But if anybody would have offered us 3 million, 2 million even, I was so broke and I was so tired, I would have paid people $1 million if I had it just to take over the business and help them get it to the next line. But I was like, our asking price is $10 million because this, that, and the other. They're like, okay, that's great. Come on, Ash, what's your walkaway price? So the thing was, it boils down to green. He said it boils down to greed. It's a really difference between having 200 million or a billion or whatever. I agree to some extent, but it's not just greed, it's also pride. But it is sins and virtues again, because when you're an entrepreneur, like, I've never felt I'm special or any nonsense like that. You know, like when I see doctors who think I have a God complex with reason, when I see nurses, when I see even teachers before I was one, I'm like, hey, these people have kind of more of an impact, as cheesy as it is. But I always also said in Montreal, whenever we'd go somewhere socially, I was always a fish out of water. There just were not that many entrepreneurs, especially that many entrepreneurs. I mean, now there are, but when I started, people thought you're crazy to do what I was doing. But if you're in San Fran, everybody around you is an entrepreneur or wannabe entrepreneur. So if you sell your business for 50 million, which is like ungodly sum, oh, poor you. About to shut down? A mercy kill? Because it's just the culture is very different, you know. But I agree with you that it's your pride. You unfortunately value yourself as a function of the way your parents cared if they were, you know, the head surgeon versus the assistant surgeon or whatever. You're both surgeons, you know what I mean? But it's people, again, we're driven by these weird things. So if you sell your business to Facebook for 50 million, but your neighbor sells his business to Facebook for $1 billion, I assure you, it's not greed, it's pride, it's a lot of other stuff. But I agree, you're in the top 1% of 1%ers. So ultimately, value is what somebody's willing to pay for it. So profitability matters, but the number one thing is you need to create tension. You need more demand for your business than supply. What I did that was really smart is I didn't build the best business on a standalone basis. I built what I thought was a great business, but ultimately a business that was unique, that would have a lot of interested parties for it. That was the key, that if today somebody wants a profitable business with a strong brand, with a, you know, sustainable economic model, with an audience that is organic, yada, 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 they're not going to go buy BuzzFeed. Like, I respect BuzzFeed. It's a bigger comparable than us, but BuzzFeed has spent $500 million. Sorry, BuzzFeed has raised $500 million and today has a market cap of $500 million. And it generates $500 million of sales, and it's being trading at one-time sales. It's kind of crazy. Now, there's a lot of externalities, but there's something structurally challenging there that they're going to have to resolve. I could go on, but there's a lot of these businesses that seem great, but they give into that institutional imperative of the herd mentality. You have to drown that out. You have to actually build a business where ultimately it's unique, and you envision people being interested in it, whether it's shareholders for an IPO or just companies that will eventually want to swallow you, gobble you. So supply and demand, arguably number one. You're always going to be accused of selling out, being a sellout. That's bullshit. At the end of the day, it's called being unselfish. It's called being pragmatic. Like, I have employees. Yes, crazy as it seems, I care about their well-being. My colleague, my partner, Raf, says this when somebody, you know, people always, my door's open, and as much as I like to think my inbox is open, people sometimes are not comfortable coming and saying, well, Ash said this or did that, and it bothers me. So Raf will sometimes, as the chief operating officer, hear that. Raf says this. I don't actually say this, but he goes, you got to bear in mind, I will not say this, but every employee, but also the way Ash is, every dependent, your kid, your spouse, is like an extra brick on Ash's back, which is a bit weird. I would never say that. And that's not true. I go, not really. It's a privilege, yada, yada. But it's true that, like, you have this pressure where you have all these people. Somebody goes, hey, I got my second kid. You're happy for them. But it's like, oh, wow, I better not mess this up. Hey, can I get a letter for the bank? I'm getting a mortgage. You're happy. Yeah, you're a homeowner. Great. But it's like, if you mess up, how are they going to pay for their mortgage, right? So eventually you get to a point, it's not a breaking point, and you don't want to be forced into this where you're like, okay, like every day, at every moment in my history, because I love M&A, I'm always talking to people. I learn a lot. I test theories. I see what people like and don't like. It's good to hear somebody go, your business sucks, your business is great. You know, to me, I love this. So I'm always talking to people, and I tell them, I go, look, to me, M&A is a means to an end, which is to grow. I go, I'm always going to be a buyer and a seller. If a deal makes sense for me to sell, I'll sell. If you want me to stay, I'll stay. If you don't want me to stay, there's no ego. I'll leave. Like, I'm not, it's a bit like what I said when an investor is going to come to you and say, should you be the CEO? The only answer is you take a piece of paper, I take a piece of paper. We both write down if I should be CEO or not. And then we'll have a conversation. Because if I tell you, I don't want to be CEO, you're like, it's your baby, your vision, without you, there's no deal. But if I say, no, I'm the CEO, you're like, ooh, you're a control freak. Well, you're a moron. You're just going to disagree with what I say. So let's both write it down, right? So you don't want to get emotional. When Kate Spade took her own life, her friends and people who knew her said, yeah, when she sold her business, it was like she sold her baby, and she never adjusted to that. And I've always made it very clear. I go, no, it's clearly Watch Mojo's my baby in some ways. To not admit that is like lying. It's like not being. But I've also said very much, I'm a custodian. I'm the ombudsman. It's already not mine. For Watch Mojo to grow, I had to let it go. I was just doing certain videos, and it grew because I said, hey, if like my colleague likes anime, we'll cover anime. And that was like a fandom that we developed. Otherwise, we would still be doing Seinfeld videos only. You know what I mean? So you have to be able to let your company grow, and most of you will not be able to do that. 99% of people that I meet do not let their business go. Not go like, leave it, I just ditch you and I go to Vegas and party for a month. Let it go to others. Let other teammates run with it. Pass the freaking puck. Gary Payton once said of Kobe Bryant, man, you don't even let the ground touch the ball. You have to let it go for your business to grow, right? Remember this bad boy? Company and product life cycle. It's weird. At the introduction, maybe you buy a company or you merge with a company to grow faster. Or you could be in the introduction of a new product, a new phase, and a company comes and gets you. At the growth stage, you're growing so fast, you just don't want to waste any time. You buy, you merge. At the maturity, you look for ways to stay fresh and young. And in the decline, you want to avoid dying. So M&A, I know we're talking about billion-dollar things, and you're like, is Ash on crack? Why are we talking about a billion-dollar company? I have this piece of paper and an idea, but you always have to think of this concept of corporate development and how it applies to you. I face this all the time. Innovator's Dilemma is not limited to traditional corporations. We face this all the time. We're known for our lists, clip-based, commentary, YouTube, Snap. Okay, we're going on TikTok. I'm always like, we need to expand. We need to change. We need to evolve. And it's hard because I know what our foundation is. And I know there's certain things we do that are iterative. Watch Mojo, Miss Mojo. Watch Mojo English, Watch Mojo Francais. There are things that are a bit more evolutionary. We'll launch this product that's a bit different, or a show format that's like a game show. But whenever we want to do really revolutionary things, it's like we fall on our face because my colleagues are not as willing to jump off a mountain without a parachute and then figure out how to fall in one piece. And as an entrepreneur, that's what you are. You're constantly taking a leap of faith and figuring out the details later. It's quite dangerous. John Stokes, whom I've referred to, the Montreal-based VC, goes, it's like you're driving super fast in a car and you see a wall and you have to have faith that somehow that wall will not be there when you get to it. Even I was like, that's kind of crazy. But that is how it is. You have to just go, go, go. And the reality is what you are building may be that really, really narrow lane and box that you will never be able to get out of. So if you're the kind of person that is content with being focused and limited to one thing, that's great. And it's ironic because you have to focus to succeed. But if you are the kind of person that will get bored, will become discontent, malcontent, not professionally, creatively challenged, you gotta start to place seeds early on. Because the later you try to diversify, the harder for your culture to adapt. I love my team. They drive me crazy because they are so set in their ways and in a good way, so focused, they're specialists at a task or something that they do, that whenever I want to do something different, it's sometimes too much of a challenge for them to adapt. The comfort zone, they're not necessarily that comfortable with. I don't want to say they're not entrepreneurial, they certainly are, but it's a very, very unique challenge. And I've grown as I get older. I'm like, good. I'm like, you know what? I'm not here bringing peace to the Middle East. I'm not curing polio or whatever, but it's fun. You know, like you become more comfortable with where you are instead of always chasing for, you know, more. Okay. And so this is the paradox of growth. For you to grow as a business, you really have to eventually focus on something very, very specific and do it better than everybody else. But the more you do that, the more you are writing a one-way ticket on the express lane to your obsolescence. It's a weird feeling, but it happens to every company. Some break that cycle, most do not. Now, phases of M&A, these are a couple sources. You develop a strategy that complements what you're doing. You assess options, you engage targets, you evaluate the discussion, you do your due diligence, you negotiate, and then you integrate. The next one, same thing. My point is, you're not reinventing. But to make it simple, I always, when I talk to advisors, I break it down into these three phases. Is there interest? It's a funnel. The world has interest in what we do. YouTube, video, mobile, Montreal. Every executive I know, oh, Montreal? Went to my friend's bachelor party there. I'd love to have an excuse to come to Montreal. Let's buy Watch Mojo. I'm like, okay, that doesn't seem like a good reason why you should be buying Watch Mojo, but sure. Doesn't mean they're interested. Do they have an intent to close the deal? That could be many things. It's negotiation, it's high level. And then action, due diligence would fall in action as well, is the actual term sheet. So these are not the numbers, but just to give you an idea of the funnel, if we've had conversations with 100 companies that have expressed an interest, I would say there's maybe 10 that showed the intent. And then maybe you're talking about 2 or 3 that will then move to the action phase. So for you to eventually sell your business, those are realistic. Now, we've been around for 17 years, which in internet is like saying, you know, I was hanging out with the dinosaurs. You know, it's a long time in our industry. But don't think the first time a company calls you and says, hey, we'd love to do a partnership, that they're actually going to move to the final stage. And the whole process could take 12 months. That's important to you. If you're running out of cash, if your runway is not 12 months and somebody calls you, don't think you're going to do a deal in 3 months. Now, corporate venture capital. So corporate venture capital, there's a lot of cases, right? I mean, ultimately, this is one that I reference quite a bit. Turner, which is a unit of Warner Media, they bought a stake in Will Ferrell's company, Funny or Die, to help it with ad sales. This will go down as one of the biggest disasters in my little universe. Why? Will Ferrell didn't need the money, so guess what happens? I'm guessing, by the way. Let's start with why this was a doomed exercise from the get-go. Warner Media, massive. They got TNT, they got Warner, they got everything. Brands come to them and are spending tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of, I'm sure Coca-Cola and Turner, both in Atlanta, Coca-Cola probably spends $200 million a year, maybe with Turner. I mean, 100 million, some obscene amount. But then they go, oh, okay, we're spending that on traditional things that Warner does. There's this little news site, it's cool, it's cute, on the internet, Funny or Die. So already for every $100 they would spend on TV, they're only going to spend $1, because this was the challenge historically. But we want Will Ferrell to be in the ad. Will Ferrell is not going to be in your ad. Will Ferrell will charge $10 million to be in an ad. So I'm guessing culture didn't make sense, expectations didn't make sense, and there was a disconnect. But if you're Die, you're now waiting for a miracle. Sitting back going, Turner's going to do ad sales for us. You're waiting. There's a lot of emails and a lot of RFPs, requests for proposals. Nothing happens. Waste of time, money, and energy. So some of the pros and cons. In life, it's always a but. It can help with marketing, sales in theory, but it's also sometimes a distraction. You get all these like inbound requests from your corporate partner, they go nowhere. Equity aligns parties. It helps create common goals because they own a stake in your business, but it also creates a conflict of interest, right? Warner Media executive is at an industry party and he goes, hey, we work with Will Ferrell. We exclusively do their ads on Funny or Die. The marketer goes, yeah, sure, we'd love to work with you. Here's my business card. There's nothing stopping then the sales guy to submit a deal and put 80, 90% of the value on Turner and just use the Will Ferrell chip just to entice them, but not give them most of the value to Funny or Die. So it does align, but it also creates weirdly enough conflicts of interest. It's great PR when you do the deal. Like if on day one, I remember pitching to Hearst and Condé Nast, all these great New York-based companies, I wanted in 2006, 7, 8, a lot of them showed interest because they were never going to do digital video themselves that early. I would have loved to go out there and say, yeah, Watch Mojo, Montreal-based company, secures, I would have sold 1% for, giving it away. But, well, what happens if they don't care about you? What happens if eventually you want to sell and they don't want to buy? Think about it. The investor has all these information rights about your business. They know more about your business than anybody else, and they don't want to buy you. What kind of signal does that send to every other potential buyer? That you suck, basically. Not necessarily, but that's the signal it can send. It does set up the potential exit down the road, in theory. But in corporate venture deals, the investor, the company usually asks for an ROFR, which is a right of first refusal. And that complicates it. Because if I sell 20% of my business, let's say to Viacom, and Viacom gets a right of first refusal, if NBC wants to come and buy us, they go, wait, do all this work, all this time, lawyers, accountants, come up to Montreal in the cold, hopefully in the summer too. And then at the last second, Viacom could just show up and say, we're going to match the offer. The deal is ours. So you as an entrepreneur, maybe negotiate a right of first look. Like, hey, Viacom, we agree to, I'm going to go out there. We're exploring some options. Before I start this process, do you want to make us an offer? A right of first look. But if you don't, or if you do, if NBC shows up and offers us more, I could do whatever the hell I want. And yes, venture capital from a corporation can help with research development, finding product market fit, but let's face it, it could also complicate things in terms of trade secrets. Similarly with board seats, Larry Page Eric Schmidt, when he was the chairman of Google, was on the board of was on the board of Apple. When Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs, found out that Apple's seeming friend, Google, was buying Android and launching Pixel, he went, in his words, thermonuclear. He was like, this is bullshit. It's a stolen product. I will do everything in my power to take them down. Now, you got to learn to be a bit more zen. Unfortunately, Steve Jobs passed away very young from pancreatic cancer. And, there's this quote of him that says at the end, when you're on your deathbed, you don't care about market share. You don't care about your wealth. It's very true. And unfortunately, we all think of that too late. But you got to let certain things slide. And next class, when we discuss legal, we'll discuss some of that as well. So ultimately, though, that's all secondary. When it comes to deal making, you have to trust the person across the table. I had somebody who for years was like, you should sell your business to us. And there was a lot of this and that, and the terms would change. And I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. And it was always, you have to believe in me. You have to trust me. And then later on, when working on another deal, the first opportunity that this person had to actually prove themselves to me that, hey, I told you you could trust me, they threw me under the bus. And I was like, my God, for years I kicked myself. I questioned myself. I said, maybe that deal would have been good, not just for myself, for my team, my company, blah, blah, blah. And everything happens for a reason. I was like, thank God I didn't do this deal, because this person would have totally not kept their end of the word either. So as I like to say, if you trust the person, sometimes it's true. I've learned to be a bit less idealistic about this, but generally the terms are a bit less important because you're going to have misunderstandings. You're going to have miscommunication. Is the other person intellectually honest? They have, are they honest? Do they have integrity, character? And most people are not. I don't want to be jaded old guy saying this. I've learned most people, unfortunately, are not because they can manage their greed. But if you're dealing with people that you trust, you could take a leap of faith. But if you are dealing with people who are not trustworthy as you'd like them, it doesn't matter what you agree to on a piece of paper, they will find a way to act in bad faith. And I can count a lot of scars from this lesson. And as much as it would drive some people to suicide, not to belittle that, it strengthens me because I go, hey, if at the end of the day, these are the things that weigh on me in the morning, I'm human at night, and I'm like, why did I do this? Why did I go, life is good. Because if that is my problem, but it's really hard when you go down business because this happens quite a bit. You see people's lack of integrity quite often, and it sucks. And as I alluded to earlier, sometimes the problem I realized was me. I had to lower my expectations. I had to stop thinking that everybody had, and again, there's people who may say Ash is this and that, but nobody will say Ash is a liar. Nobody will say Ash is dishonest. That's what I kind of strive for. But I realized, most people in business, the leader of the biggest corporations became the leaders because they were most willing to step on people's necks, unfortunately. It's a sad reality and a sad state of affairs, but it's true. So when you're negotiating, also understand it's easier to give than to take. You got to be guarded. Tarof, be open in spirit too much and just say yes because, you can then back if you realize, we're talking about something different. And you want to avoid finding yourself in disagreements, because then you find yourself in litigation. And it is easier to defend than to prosecute, meaning like if you feel you were wrong, it's hard to actually go out there and prove that, because the courts actually, as much as we all say the judicial system is unfair, it does make sense as well. And as much as it's really hard on you emotionally and financially to defend yourself, maybe I'm naive, but generally speaking, if you didn't do any wrongdoing, when I got sued, the first judge, the one who was like, this kid hasn't had time to prepare, come back in a few days. When I was like before I just stuck to the law and set aside all emotions, at some point I'm like, look, Your Honor, and in Canada, it's my lord, my lady. I was like, my lord, this is not even fair because of this. And he's like, look, it's not a question of fairness. He's like, you want to be in the big leagues. If you got News Corporation suing you, he's like, if it's the Fox, like the Fox from TV, you're in the majors now, boy. And that's actually, it helped me. I was like, I should have fun with this, which in hindsight at the time, I needed to wear diapers for a few days. I was so nervous. But my point is, be aware when you're negotiating because it's high stakes. People are being driven from a lot of insecurity, a lot of fear. So sometimes if they come after you in a good way to buy your business, the stakes are really high, even if you don't know them.